She grabbed the mop right out of his hands. In front of 30 people, Ava Kensington, billionaire, CEO, cover of Forbes, owner of everything in that building, snatched the mop from a maintenance worker like she was pulling a dirty rag off her marble floor. "You're in my way," she said. She didn't even look at his face. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. And Logan Reed, a quiet white man in a gray uniform, father of an 8-year-old girl, simply stepped aside. But 5 years later, that same man would do something no expert on earth could do. He would make her cry. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens next. The morning it all started, Logan Reed had been awake since 4:30. Not because of an alarm. He hadn't needed one in years. His body just knew the way. A soldier's body knows that the day begins before the sun does, and that complaining about it doesn't change anything. He made coffee in a paper cup because he hadn't replaced the broken mug yet. He checked on Maya, still asleep in the room he'd painted yellow because she asked him to. Yellow like sunflowers, she had said. So he painted it yellow like sunflowers. He packed her lunch. Peanut butter on whole wheat apple slices. A folded napkin with a small drawing he'd done the night before, a stick figure of a man and a girl standing next to a race car. Maya loved race cars. She said they looked like they were running even when they were standing still. Logan thought about that sometimes, about things that looked like they were standing still. He dropped Maya at school at 7:15. She hugged him hard around the waist, her backpack nearly bigger than she was, and ran toward the doors without looking back. She trusted the world completely. He envied that. He used to be that way. By 7:45, he was at Kensington Luxury Garage. Battery. The garage was on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. One of those places where the ceiling was higher than most people's apartments, and the cars on the floor cost more than most people made in a decade. Ferraris, Aston Martins, a McLaren the color of liquid mercury. The air smelled like leather and money, and the specific kind of silence that wealth buys. Logan had worked there 11 months. He came in before the technicians mopped the floors, so the tile gleamed, cleaned the glass on the display cases, restocked the supply closet, fixed whatever was leaking or broken or loose. He did his job, and he did it well, and he said very little to anyone. And the senior technician, a man named Garrett, called him the Ghost. Not cruelly exactly, more the way people name something they don't quite understand. Logan appeared, cleaned, disappeared. Nobody thought much about him. That was fine. Logan had learned over the years that invisibility had its advantages. What none of them knew. What nobody in that building knew was that Logan Reed had once stood in workshops in Bologna and Stuttgart and Maranello, with grease under his fingernails and engineers asking him questions. He had once written a technical paper on pre-war Italian engine restoration that was still cited in academic circles under a name that wasn't quite his anymore, because he had changed it quietly after everything fell apart. That was another life. Another man almost. This man mopped floors. She arrived at 9:03. Logan heard her before he saw her. Not because she was loud, but because the entire room changed when she walked in. The technicians straightened. Garrett put down his coffee. Even the air seemed to tighten. Ava Kensington was 32 years old and had the kind of face that people described as striking before they remembered they were also supposed to say beautiful. She wore a charcoal blazer, no jewelry except small gold earrings, and moved through the space the way people move when they've never once had to worry about whether they belonged somewhere. She owned the building. She owned the garage. She owned, as best Logan could figure, approximately everything in a 6-block radius. She did not look at him as she walked past. He was mopping near the corner where the 1963 Ferrari 250 GTE sat behind a low velvet rope. He stepped back, moved the bucket, gave her room. She didn't acknowledge it. He hadn't expected her to. Garrett. Her voice was clear and controlled. Where are we? Garrett crossed the floor, quickly, tablet in hand. Ms. Kensington, we've completed the third diagnostic cycle this week. Same results as before. There's no mechanical failure we can identify. The fuel system is intact. Ignition components are all functional, the electrical. So it still won't start. A pause. No, ma'am. It still won't start. Ava looked at the Ferrari. Logan kept his eyes on the floor, but he watched. That was something he'd learned to do, look without looking, pay attention without appearing to. Yeah, the Ferrari was extraordinary. Even from across the room, even after 11 months of seeing it every day, it was extraordinary. The color was a deep, almost burgundy red Rosso Corsa, the old shade before the formula changed in the 1970s. The chrome caught the light differently depending on where you stood. It wasn't flashy the way modern cars were flashy. It was the kind of beautiful that required you to slow down. He had wondered about it since his first week. There was something, a quality in how the car sat, in the subtle geometry of it, that had been pulling at a corner of his mind. He hadn't let himself think about it directly. That wasn't his job. 5 years, Ava said quietly. She wasn't talking to Garrett anymore. She was talking to herself, or to the car, or to someone who wasn't in the room. 5 years. Ms. Kensington, I've hired 17 specialists, she said. Her voice was still controlled, but something beneath it was not. I have spent... She stopped. She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. Do you understand what this car is? Do you understand what it means to me? Yes, ma'am. Garrett said, though his expression suggested he understood it mostly as a logistical problem. Ava turned and walked toward the Ferrari. She stopped at the velvet rope. She looked at the car for a long moment. And then she did something Logan didn't expect. She reached out and touched the hood. Just the tips of her fingers. Gently. It was such a private gesture that Logan looked away. That was the moment she saw him. You. He looked up. She was staring at him. Not the way people usually stared at him, through him, past him in the general direction of the mop. She was staring directly at him. How long have you worked here? Logan set the mop handle against his palm. 11 months, Ms. Kensington. And how many times a week do you clean in this section? He considered. Every day. So you've been looking at this car every day for 11 months. I suppose so, yes, ma'am. She looked at him the way you look at something you're not sure is useful yet. Her eyes moved across his uniform, his hands, his face. He watched her calculate. What's your name? Logan. Logan Reed. Mr. Reed. She said it the way people say a name they're about to forget. Have you ever worked on cars? Something moved through his chest. He kept his face still. I know a little about them. It wasn't a lie. It was the most precisely calibrated understatement he had ever delivered. Garrett made a small sound, not quite a laugh. One of the younger technicians near the back of the garage looked up from his workstation. Ava either didn't hear it or didn't care. She kept her eyes on Logan. Take a look at it, she said. Silence. Ms. Kensington, Garrett said carefully, our team has already... I'm not asking your team. She hadn't looked away from Logan. I'm asking him. The garage went very quiet. Logan looked at the Ferrari. He looked at Ava. He said, I'm not a technician, Ms. Kensington. I know what you are, Mr. Reed. There was something in her voice that was meant to put him in his place, a kind of flat certainty, the confidence of someone who had categorized everything in her world and was comfortable with the categories. I'm not asking you to perform surgery. I'm asking you to look at it. He understood what she was doing. She was humoring herself. She was frustrated, and she was grasping, and she needed to feel like she had tried everything, and having the janitor look at the car was a way of closing a box. When he failed, the box would be closed. He set the mop against the wall. All right, he said. He didn't touch the car, not at first. He walked around it, slowly. The way you walk around something you're trying to understand rather than inspect. Garrett stood nearby with his arms crossed. Two of the technicians had drifted closer, doing a poor job of pretending they weren't watching. Ava stood back near the door, her phone in her hand, but her eyes on him. Logan crouched near the front left wheel well, stood, moved to the rear, crouched again. He looked at the undercarriage, not with a flashlight. Just looked, his eyes patient and unhurried. "Is he actually doing anything?" one of the technicians muttered. Garrett said nothing. Logan came around to the driver's side. He looked at the door, not the handle, not the chrome trim, but the door itself. The angle of it. The way it sat in the frame. Something landed in his mind. A quiet, specific something. He didn't reach for it yet. "Ms. Kensington," he said. She looked up from her phone. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Your father. He was the one who owned this car." The room temperature dropped 2 degrees. Garrett looked alarmed. One of the technicians actually took a half step back. Ava's expression didn't collapse. She was too controlled for that. But something shifted behind her eyes, a tightening, a flicker of something that might have been pain or might have been warning. "Yes," she said. Her voice was careful. "He died 5 years ago. The car has been here since." "Did he drive it often?" "Every Sunday, without exception." Logan nodded slowly. "Did he teach you to drive in it?" Another pause, longer this time. "He tried," she said, and something almost like softness came into her voice for just a moment before she closed it off again. "I wasn't very good at it." Logan looked back at the car. "He was a careful man," Logan asked. "Particular about things." "He was precise about everything," Ava said. There was no warmth in the word, and enormous warmth in the word at the same time. "He built a real estate company from nothing. He didn't leave things to chance." Logan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "May I come back tomorrow?" Garrett looked at Ava. Ava looked at Logan. "Why tomorrow?" she asked. "Because I want to think about something first," Logan said. "And I don't want to be wrong." He picked up Maya at 3:15. She ran out of the school doors the way she always did, like she'd been holding energy all day, and this was the first safe moment to release it. She hit him at the waist, and he caught her and spun her, once she still liked that still held her arms out like wings when he did it, and then set her down and took her backpack. "How was it?" he asked. "We learned about volcanoes," she said. "Did you know that inside the Earth is basically just fire everywhere? Like the whole middle of the Earth is fire." "I did know that." "How does it not just explode?" she demanded. "That," he said, "is a very good question." They walked to the subway. Maya's hand in his, her sneakers slapping the sidewalk. She talked about volcanoes the whole way home, and he listened the way he always listened, fully without distraction, because she deserved that. Because she was the thing in his life that still worked exactly as it was supposed to. Bansama. That night, after dinner and homework and the argument about brushing teeth that they had every night as if it were the first time, he sat at the kitchen table and opened his laptop. He didn't look up Ferrari 250 GTE. He didn't need to. He knew the mechanical specs, the way some men know sports statistics or scripture, not because he'd studied them, but because they were part of him. What he looked up was a name. Carlo Mancini. He hadn't typed that name in 6 years. Dead. The results came up the way they always did obituaries first. Mancini had died 4 years ago at 79. A brief, respectful obituary in a Milan newspaper. A longer one in a trade journal he'd subscribed to in another life. Master craftsman, legendary restorer, innovator in pre-war Italian mechanics. Logan read the obituaries slowly. Then he typed another search: Mancini. Hidden Systems, 1963 Ferrari, 25 OGTE. Kensington. Nothing. He hadn't expected anything, but the idea was growing. Carlo Mancini had been his mentor for 3 years in a workshop outside Florence, where the world was quieter and the work was everything. Mancini was the kind of man who believed that a truly magnificent machine should know its owner, not metaphorically, but mechanically. He had spoken often about hidden sequences, about cars that had personalities, preferences, about locks that weren't locks. A door doesn't have to look like a door, he had said once, in that particular way of his half teaching and half talking to himself, to be the only way in or out. Logan closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time. Then he went to check on Maya, who was asleep with one arm hanging off the bed and her mouth slightly open, absolutely unconcerned with everything. He stood in the doorway, just for a moment. Then he went to bed. He was back at the Ferrari at 7 a.m. Garrett wasn't in yet. Neither were most of the technicians. A young man named Danny was at the front desk, barely awake, and he looked up when Logan came in and didn't ask any questions, because Logan came in this early every day. Logan went to the supply closet. He got his cart. He pushed it toward the Ferrari section. But he didn't start mopping. He stood in front of the Ferrari for a full minute, just stood there. Then he moved the velvet rope aside. He opened the driver's door. He sat in the seat. The leather was old and perfect, the way good leather gets when it has been cared for rather than used. It smelled faintly of oil and something else, cedar maybe, something deliberate. Logan put his hands on the steering wheel. He didn't try to start it. He just sat there, thinking, remembering something Mancini had told him once about a 1959 Lancia he had restored for a man in Lausanne, a man who had insisted that the car remember him. The sequence has nothing to do with ignition, Mancini had said. The sequence is a conversation. You must say hello before you ask the car to go anywhere. Logan looked at the dashboard. He looked at the mirror. He adjusted it slightly, just a fraction, to a very particular angle. He moved the seat back. 2 clicks. He placed his left hand on the gear shift, not in gear, just resting. He looked at the dashboard again and saw something he had noticed yesterday, but hadn't been ready to think about directly. A small wear pattern on the leather near the lower left of the dash. The kind of wear pattern a hand makes when it reaches for something habitually. Not a control, not a switch, just a spot. He placed his right hand there. Pressed gently. Nothing happened. He pressed differently, not pushing in but pressing down and to the right simultaneously, the way you'd operate a mechanism that was designed to feel like not a mechanism. He heard a click. Not the click of something breaking, the click of something opening. And beneath the dash, a small panel released just a centimeter, barely visible unless you were looking for it, revealing a secondary switch. Simple, mechanical, old. Logan looked at it for a long moment. He exhaled. Then he flipped the switch. He inserted the key into the ignition. He turned it. The Ferrari 25 OGTE's V12 engine had been silent for 5 years. In those 5 years, 17 of the world's foremost automotive specialists had stood in front of it. They had run diagnostics. They had replaced components. They had argued with each other and filed reports and charged enormous amounts of money and walked away no closer to an answer. Because they had been asking the wrong question. They had been asking, what is broken? And the answer Logan Reed had sat with in his quiet kitchen the night before, the answer that had come from a mentor he'd never mentioned to anyone in this building, from a life he'd buried under 11 months of mopping floors. The answer was, nothing is broken. The car simply hasn't been properly introduced to anyone who spoke its language. The engine turned over. It caught. And then it sang. That is the only word for it. Not rumbled, not roared, sang. The V12 came to life with a sound that filled the garage like something remembered, like a voice from a long time ago. And for 3 full seconds, the sound was the only thing in the world. Danny dropped something at the front desk. Logan sat very still with his hands in his lap. The Ferrari ran smooth and even and perfect. He heard footsteps behind him, then more footsteps, voices. He heard Garrett say, "What the?" He heard someone else say, "Is that?" And then he heard a sound that was different from all the other sounds. He heard Ava Kensington cry. He didn't turn around. He gave her that. He kept his eyes forward, one hand resting on the wheel, and let the car run, and let her have the sound, and let the moment be whatever it needed to be, for a woman who had been waiting 5 years to hear her father's voice in an engine. When he finally turned off the car and stepped out, the garage was full of people. Ava was standing 20 feet away, her hand over her mouth, her eyes bright with something that wasn't just grief and wasn't just relief. It was something more complicated than either of those things. She looked at him, really looked at him, maybe for the first time, and he saw the exact moment she understood that she had no idea who he was. He handed the key to Garrett, who took it in stunned silence. Then Logan picked up his mop from where he'd left it against the wall. "I'll finish the floor now," he said. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. Logan Reed began to mop. Nobody talked about it directly. That was the thing Logan noticed most in the hours after the engine roared back to life. Nobody in that garage said a single plain word about what had just happened. Garrett walked back to his workstation, like a man who needed something to do with his hands. The younger technicians drifted apart slowly, the way people drift after witnessing something they haven't processed yet. Danny at the front desk pretended to be extremely busy with paperwork. And Logan mopped the floor. He mopped the section near the display cases. He mopped the corridor between the service bays. He moved his cart with the same unhurried steadiness he brought to everything, and he kept his eyes where they belonged, and he let the silence settle around him, like it always did. But he felt it. He felt every set of eyes that found him, and then quickly looked away. He felt the weight of the question nobody was asking out loud. Who is this man? He had lived with that question before, in a different context, in a different country, with different stakes. He knew what it felt like when the world suddenly needed to reorder its understanding of you, and he knew that the world didn't like doing that. It was uncomfortable. It required people to admit they had been wrong, and people in Logan's experience would do almost anything to avoid that particular admission. So they didn't talk about it. They went back to their stations and their diagnostics and their coffee, and Logan Reed went back to his mop, and the Ferrari sat behind its velvet rope with its engine finally quiet again, and everything looked almost exactly like it had before. Except Ava Kensington hadn't moved. She was still standing near the far wall, her phone in her hand, her eyes on the car. Logan could see her in his peripheral vision. She wasn't crying anymore. She had pulled herself back together with the efficiency of someone who had learned very early that falling apart in front of people was a luxury she couldn't afford. But she hadn't left, and she hadn't gone back to her phone calls or her meetings or whatever the rest of her morning was supposed to look like. She was watching him. He knew it the way you know when someone is watching you. That particular pressure. He kept mopping. Finally, she walked toward him. He stopped. "Mr. Reed." "Ms. Kensington." She stood about 4 feet away, close enough to talk quietly, far enough to maintain whatever this was not quite professional, not quite personal, something that didn't have a clean category yet. "How did you know?" she asked. It was a simple question, and it was also an enormous question, and they both understood that. Logan considered his answer carefully. "I had a feeling," he said. Her expression shifted. Not anger, something cooler than anger. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She waited. She was good at waiting that particular executive stillness, the patience of someone who understood that silence is leverage. Logan said, "The car was built by someone who loved it. When something is built with that much care, sometimes the way into it is care, not tools." Ava looked at him for a long moment. That sounds like something someone says when they don't want to explain something. Maybe, Logan said. Or maybe it's the truest thing I could tell you right now. She studied him the way she had studied him the day before that calculation behind her eyes. But something in the calculation had shifted. Yesterday, she had been trying to figure out if he was useful. Today, she was trying to figure out what he was. "What's your background?" she asked. "Maintenance," he said. "Before that?" He held her gaze. "I moved around a lot." She almost smiled. Almost. "You're being deliberately vague." "I'm being careful," he said, and it came out more honest than he intended. Something in that honesty landed. He saw it land. Her chin lifted slightly, just a fraction, the way a person moves when they've heard something unexpected from a direction they weren't watching. She said, "I'd like you to come back tomorrow, and the day after. I want you to look at the car more carefully. There may be other things I've missed." Logan said, "I have a job, Miss Kensington. You work for my company, Mr. Reed." "I work for the maintenance department of your company," he said. "Which means I have a supervisor who decides my assignments, and I have floors that need cleaning." Another moment of silence. Then very quietly she said, "I will speak to your supervisor." He nodded once. "All right." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Mr. Reed." She didn't turn around when she said it. "That car was my father's. He drove it every Sunday for 20 years. He died in January 5 years ago, and I have not heard that engine since the morning he left for the last time." She paused. "Thank you." Logan said nothing. She walked out. He stood there for a moment, holding the mop, listening to her footsteps cross the marble floor and disappear through the front door. Then he went back to work. That afternoon, his supervisor, a broad man named Phil, who smelled permanently of cigarettes and spoke primarily in short declarative sentences, found Logan in the supply closet and looked at him with genuine confusion. "Kensington called me," Phil said. "I know." "She wants you on the Ferrari project." "I know." Phil was quiet for a moment. "Logan, you mop floors?" "I know that too, Phil. She's asking for you specifically, by name." Phil said this the way someone says something they suspect might be a clerical error. "Are you sure she has the right—" "She has the right person," Logan said. Phil scratched the back of his neck. He looked at Logan the way people occasionally looked at Logan when the world wasn't quite adding up the way they'd arranged it. Then he shrugged, because Phil was fundamentally a practical man, and said, "All right, I'll sort out the paperwork." And the paperwork. As if that was the strange part. Logan finished restocking the shelf he'd been working on, picked up his cart, and went back out to the floor. That was a Thursday. By Friday morning, everything had changed. Not visibly. Not in any way that announced itself, but Logan could feel it the way a room changes temperature before anyone mentions it's cold. Garrett stopped making the small dismissive sounds he usually made when Logan passed. The younger technicians who had previously treated him like furniture began glancing up when he entered a space the way people glance up when they're recalibrating something. Nobody apologized. Nobody acknowledged the shift. It just happened silently, the way the most significant things usually happen. He was at the Ferrari again at 8 a.m. this time, with Garrett standing nearby, not to supervise exactly, but present in the way a man is present when he wants to understand something and doesn't know how to ask. Logan opened the driver's door again. He didn't sit this time. He crouched beside it and looked at the interior from the outside, examining the way the door lined up with the frame, the specific geometry of how it closed. "The panel under the dash," Garrett said finally. "I looked at it this morning. I ran diagnostics on the switch. It registers as non-functional. Our system said it was a dead component." "Your system was rating it correctly," Logan said. "It is non-functional in isolation. It only activates as part of a sequence." Garrett was quiet. "What kind of sequence?" "A specific series of adjustments. Seat position, mirror angle, gear position. In that order, in those exact measurements." Logan stood. The switch completes a circuit only when the other elements are aligned. Individually, any one of them reads as neutral. Together, they form a key. Garrett stared at him. That's not in any documentation. We had the original production records from Maranello. It wasn't a factory modification, Logan said. It was done after, by a craftsman. Which craftsman? Logan paused. Someone who cared about the car, he said, and about the man who owned it. Garrett absorbed this. He was a proud man. Logan had understood that from the first week, and pride made the next thing difficult. But he said it anyway, and Logan gave him credit for that. How did you know to look for it? Garrett asked. Logan looked at the Ferrari, at the particular quality of light on the old chrome, at the color that wasn't quite red and wasn't quite anything else. I've seen this kind of work before, he said, a long time ago. He didn't say more than that. And Garrett, perhaps sensing that there was a wall there and that the wall was not going to move, didn't push. That afternoon, Logan was called to Ava's office on the 14th floor. He had never been above the 3rd floor in that building. He rode the elevator in his work clothes, gray uniform clean, but worn at the cuffs, and stood in the hallway outside her office for a moment before he knocked. Come in. The office was large and faced west, which meant it was full of afternoon light. Ava was at her desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, 3 open laptops, and a cascade of documents spread around her. She looked up when he entered and gestured to the chair across from her without ceremony. He sat. She looked at him directly, the way she looked at everything, without evasion, without small talk. Like looking away was something she had decided not to do. I want to know about the hidden system, she said. Not the mechanics. The why. Why would someone build that into my father's car? Logan thought about how to answer. Because your father must have wanted the car to know him, he said. Not just anyone could take it out. Not even the best mechanic. It would only run for someone who approached it the right way. Ava's expression didn't change, but something moved through her. My father was like that, she said. About everything. He didn't trust things that came too easily. The sequence had to be learned, Logan said. Which means your father knew it. He must have set it up with whoever built the system. She leaned back. You said a craftsman. What craftsman? Logan met her eyes. The kind that doesn't leave signatures. She held his gaze for a moment. She was trying to read him, and he was letting her see exactly as much as he chose to let her see, and she was smart enough to recognize the negotiation happening. You know more than you're saying, she said. I know some things, he said. I'm not sure yet which ones are mine to say. That surprised her. He could see it. She was accustomed to directness, accustomed actually to getting exactly the information she asked for, because she was Ava Kensington, and information was something people gave her. That's an unusual answer, she said. It's an honest one. She considered him for a long moment. Then she said something that he genuinely didn't expect. What does your daughter think of cars? The question hit him somewhere undefended. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. She saw the flicker. She saw that it mattered. She loves them, he said. She says they look like they're running even when they're standing still. Something in Ava's face softened. Just slightly, just for a second. How old? 8. What's her name? Maya. Ava nodded slowly, looking at the desk. Something private moved across her face, and then was gone. My father used to take me to car shows when I was about that age, she said. He'd let me sit in the cars. I thought it was the most important thing in the world at the time. She paused. It was, actually. Logan said nothing. He let it sit. Then she pulled herself back. He watched her do it. The small straightening of posture. The return to the controlled clarity that was her default, and said, I want you to examine the rest of the car, every inch of it. If there's a hidden system, there may be other hidden things. I think there are, Logan said quietly. Her eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I don't know yet," he said. "But the man who built that sequence, the craftsman, he was someone who worked in layers. He didn't do one thing when he could do 5. Logan looked at his own hands for a moment. "I think there's more in that car. I just need time to look." The office was very quiet. "Take whatever time you need," she said. He stood to leave. "Mr. Reed?" Her voice stopped him at the door. "Why didn't you say anything when you figured out what the problem was? You sat in the car for how long were you there before I arrived?" He turned. "About 40 minutes. 40 minutes, she repeated. "Alone with the car?" "Yes." "Why didn't you start it then? Why did you wait for me?" He thought about it. He thought about a woman who had been waiting 5 years. He thought about a sound that belonged to someone's grief. "Because it wasn't mine to hear first," he said. Ava Kensington stared at him. And for the first time since he had worked in her building, she looked at him without any calculation in her eyes at all. He nodded once and left. In the elevator going down, Logan stood with his hands at his sides and looked at the floor numbers descending and thought about Maya, who would be getting out of school in 2 hours, and about a Ferrari that held more secrets than one, and about a mentor long dead who had once told him that the most important lock is always the one nobody thinks to look for. He thought about what else might be hidden in that car. He thought about the fact that he wasn't ready for what he suspected he would find. The elevator doors opened. He walked back out onto the garage floor past the technicians, past Garrett, past the display cases, and the velvet rope to the supply closet where his cart was waiting. He picked up his mop. He went back to work. He had 2 hours before he needed to pick up Maya. And in those 2 hours, the world was exactly what it appeared to be, and he needed it to stay that way just a little longer. Because he had a feeling, the same kind of quiet feeling that had told him about the hidden switch, the kind of feeling that came from years of knowing things he hadn't asked to know that very soon everything was going to change. Not for the garage, not for Ava Kensington's company, or her reputation, or her extraordinary life. For him. The weekend came and went, and Logan thought about the Ferrari every hour of it without meaning to. Saturday, he took Maya to the park, pushed her on the swings until his arms ached, ate hot dogs from a cart on the corner, and listened to her explain at great length why dinosaurs were more interesting than any other animal that had ever existed. He agreed with her because she was right, and also because watching her talk about things she loved was the best part of any day. On Sunday he did laundry, fixed the cabinet door under the kitchen sink that had been loose for 3 weeks, helped Maya with a book report on a chapter book about a girl who builds a rocket ship, and sat up late at the kitchen table after she went to sleep staring at nothing in particular, thinking about layers. That was the word that stayed with him. Layers. Carlo Mancini had worked in layers the way a painter works in layers, each one invisible, until you understood what you were looking at, each one building towards something that only made sense from a distance. Logan had watched him work for 3 years. He had handed him tools and learned silence, and learned patience, and learned that the most important part of restoring something was understanding what it had been before it needed restoring. He thought about what Ava had said. Her father was precise about everything. He didn't leave things to chance. A man like that with a car like that with a craftsman like Mancini, a man like that didn't just hide a starting sequence. A man like that hid something worth keeping. Logan was at the garage by 7:15 Monday morning. Garrett was already there, which surprised him. Garrett was usually in by 8:30, not a minute before. He was standing near the Ferrari with a coffee cup in his hand, and the expression of a man who had been doing a lot of thinking over the weekend himself. "Reed," he said. Garrett. A pause. "I pulled old records over the weekend. Private restoration work done on this car in 1987 before Kensington Sr. bought it. The shop in Milan that did the work they closed in 1991. Owner died in 2019. He stopped. "You knew the owner." "Was he, sir?" It wasn't a question. Logan moved the velvet rope aside and crouched beside the car. "Why do you say that?" "Because you knew exactly what to look for," Garrett said. "And you're not going to tell me how unless you want to." Logan looked up at him. Garrett was watching him with something that wasn't quite respect and wasn't quite suspicion. Something in between the look of a man readjusting a measurement he'd been confident in. "His name was Carlo Mancini," Logan said. "He was the best restoration specialist I've ever seen. He built hidden systems into cars for clients who wanted them. He never documented it, never wrote it down. The only way to know about it was to have worked with him." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "And you worked with him? For 3 years? Where?" "Florence, then Stuttgart, then Modena." Garrett looked at the Ferrari, then back at Logan. "How does a man who worked in Florence and Stuttgart end up mopping floors in Manhattan?" Logan held his gaze. "Life," he said simply. Garrett absorbed that. He was a practical man, and he recognized a door when it was closed, and the door was closed, so he nodded once and said, "All right. What are you looking for today?" "I'm not sure yet," Logan said, "but I'll know it when I find it." He spent the next 2 hours inside the Ferrari. Not working, not in any traditional sense, more like listening. He moved through the interior the way you move through a place where something important happened slowly, with full attention, touching surfaces and then letting go, tracking the logic of the space. Mancini's fingerprints were everywhere once you knew to look. Not literal fingerprints, the man was too careful for that. Logical fingerprints. The placement of certain bolts at non-standard torque. A seam in the leather that appeared decorative and wasn't. A small imperfection in the carpet behind the driver's seat that wasn't an imperfection at all. Logan found it at 9:47. Behind the driver's seat at the base of the rear footwell, there was a section of carpet that appeared to be glued down like the rest of it. It was. But the adhesive on one 6-inch section was a different compound, newer, more flexible, the kind that releases cleanly when you apply pressure at a precise angle. Logan pressed. The carpet released. Beneath it was a thin steel panel, perhaps 8 inches by 5, fitted flush with the floor. No handle, no visible seam, just a panel that looked exactly like the structural floor of the car. Logan pressed his thumb to the lower left corner and held it for 3 seconds. The panel shifted. He heard Garrett exhale sharply behind him. He hadn't realized Garrett was watching, but of course Garrett was watching. Everybody who could see the car was watching. "What is that?" Garrett said quietly. Logan lifted the panel. Inside was a recessed compartment approximately the size of a shoebox, lined with the same kind of cedar he had smelled when he first sat in the seat. The lining was pristine. Whatever was in here had been protected. There was a photograph. A small envelope sealed. And a key. Logan did not touch any of it. He stood up. He took 3 steps back. He took out his phone and called the only number he had for Ava Kensington, the one her assistant had given him on Friday. It rang twice. "Mr. Reed." Her voice was brisk in meeting, brisk, the voice of someone who answered calls they didn't plan to take. "You need to come to the garage," he said. A pause. "I'm in the middle of Ms. Kensington." His voice was quiet, but it stopped her. "Please come now." 31 minutes later, she walked through the front door. She was still in her coat, which meant she had come directly from wherever she had been without going up to her office first. Her assistant was half a step behind her, already being waved off, already retreating. She walked straight to Logan, who was standing beside the Ferrari, and looked at his face first, before she looked at anything else. "What did you find?" she said. He stepped aside. She saw the open compartment. She didn't move for a full 5 seconds. Then she crouched slowly and looked at the contents. The photograph, the sealed envelope, the key. When she stood back up, her face was completely still in the way faces are completely still when something is happening behind them that can't be expressed yet. My father put this here, she said. Not a question. I believe so, Logan said. Or Mancini put it here at his instruction. Either way, it was intended to be found eventually. By who? By whoever could start the car, Logan said. Ava looked at him. The weight of that landed clearly. Whoever could start the car. 5 years of experts. 17 specialists. Millions of dollars. And then one quiet man with a mop. Can I? She started. It's your car, he said gently. It's yours. She reached into the compartment and picked up the photograph first. Logan watched her face when she looked at it. Watched the careful control she kept over herself begin to crack at the edges just slightly, the way ice cracks before it breaks those thin lines that spread from a single point. She turned the photograph so Logan could see it, though he suspected she wasn't fully conscious of doing it. It was a black and white image of a young man, perhaps 30, standing beside the Ferrari. The Ferrari looked newer in the photograph. The man was laughing at something off camera, one hand on the hood, completely at ease. That's my father, she said. He must have been about 30. Logan looked at the photograph. The young man had Ava's chin, her posture, that particular quality of occupying space with certainty. He looks happy, Logan said. He was always happy around this car, she said, something fragile in her voice. I forgot that. I forgot how happy he looked around this car. She held the photograph carefully and picked up the sealed envelope. Her name was written on it, not her full name, just Ava, in handwriting that was small and careful and clearly very old. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Logan. Would you give me a minute? Of course. He stepped away, moved toward the other end of the garage, kept his back to her, and watched nothing in particular. He gave her 10 minutes. When he came back, she was standing with the opened envelope in one hand and the letter in the other, and her eyes were red, but her jaw was set, and she was holding herself together with the particular discipline of someone who learned very young that falling apart is a private affair. He wrote it 2 weeks before he died, she said without looking up. He knew he was sick. He hadn't told me yet. A pause. He never told me. Logan said nothing. Sometimes nothing is the only thing. He said... Her voice caught. She cleared her throat. Hard. Started again. He said he hid it here because he knew someday the right person would find it. He said the car would know. She lowered the letter. He was always saying things like that. I thought he was being poetic. He wasn't being poetic. No, Logan said. He wasn't. She looked at the key, still in the compartment. Small, old-fashioned, with a simple round bow and a tag attached to it with a piece of string. What does the letter say about the key? Logan asked carefully. Ava picked it up, read the tag. Her expression shifted something new in it now, something that wasn't grief, but moved alongside grief. There's a storage facility, she said. In Brooklyn. Unit number is on the tag. She paused. He says there are documents there, and... She stopped again, read the line again. He says there are documents that belong to someone else. Someone who told the truth and was not believed. She looked up. Her eyes found Logan's. He says he spent years trying to find this person. He says he never could. The garage was very quiet. Logan's heart was doing something unusual. Something he didn't have a name for, exactly a kind of cold recognition, like putting your hand on a wall in the dark and realizing you know this room. What kind of documents? Logan said. His voice was steady. He was proud of that. He doesn't say specifically, Ava said. She was still watching his face. But he says they're proof that someone told the truth about a fraud, a large one, in the automotive restoration industry. The floor could have opened up beneath Logan Reed and he would not have moved. He says the person who was right lost everything, Ava continued. Her voice had changed slower now, more careful because she was watching his face, and his face, despite everything he knew about keeping it still, was telling her something. Their career. Their marriage, Logan said quietly. Silence. Complete silence. Ava stared at him. Mr. Reed, she said slowly. It was 15 years ago, Logan said. His voice was even, flat, the voice of a man describing something that happened to someone else because that was the only way to describe it without coming apart. I was a restoration specialist working in Europe. I discovered that a consortium of dealers and appraisers were falsifying provenance documents. Cars that had been in accidents were being sold as factory originals. Millions of dollars. Multiple countries. I documented everything and I brought it to the authorities. He stopped. The wrong authorities, as it turned out. The fraud reached further than I understood. Within 6 months, my contracts were canceled. My reputation was destroyed. A counter-narrative was built that I had fabricated the evidence, that I was motivated by a business dispute. He paused. My wife left. She left. I had Maya. I had some savings. I moved back to the States and started over. He had said it in maybe 90 seconds. 15 years of his life in 90 seconds. Ava had not moved. Your name, she said. Your name was different then. Yes. Logan Reed isn't your birth name. No. What was it? A long pause. Lucas Reinhold, he said. Ava's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, there was something in them that was not pity. She was too smart for pity, and he would not have wanted it anyway, but something adjacent to pity. Recognition of injustice. The specific look of someone who has just understood the shape of something terrible. Lucas Reinhold, she repeated. My father has a folder in that storage unit with that name on it. He told me about it once years ago. He said there was a man who had been wronged by the same people he'd spent years trying to expose. She stopped. He tried to find you. Logan's throat tightened. My father was not a man who left things alone when they were wrong, Ava said. He was not a man who walked past injustice because it was inconvenient. She looked at Logan with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. He spent 3 years trying to locate the original whistleblower. He had a private investigator on it. He hit dead ends everywhere because you... Because I disappeared, Logan said. Because you disappeared, she confirmed. The two of them stood there in a garage full of expensive cars and quiet technicians, pretending not to listen, and the weight of it settled over everything. The 15 years, the destroyed career, the new name, the mop and the gray uniform, and the 11 months of invisible mornings. He found the documents, Logan said. The real ones. It appears so, Ava said quietly. He just couldn't find you. Logan looked at the key in her hand. The key to a storage unit in Brooklyn that contained 15 years of his life, found and preserved by a man he'd never met inside a car he'd been mopping around for 11 months without knowing. There are moments in a life that are so precisely improbable that they feel like something other than coincidence. Logan had learned not to trust that feeling. He'd been disappointed too many times by things that looked like fate and turned out to be just weather. But standing in that garage looking at that key with Mancini's work all around him and a dead man's letter in a woman's hand, he felt it anyway. Ava held out the key. He didn't take it immediately. He looked at it for a moment. The storage unit is in your father's name, he said. Yes. Which means it's yours now. Yes, she said again. But what's in it? She pushed the key closer. What's in it isn't mine. He took the key. It was small and ordinary, and it weighed nothing at all, and it weighed everything. Garrett had stopped pretending to work. He was standing openly now, 20 feet away, watching. Two of the technicians were watching. Danny at the front desk was watching. Nobody bothered to pretend anymore. Ava turned to look at all of them. Then she turned back to Logan. "When can you go?" she said. Logan thought about Maya, about pickup at 3:15, about a cabinet door he'd fixed, and a book report about a girl who builds a rocket ship. "Tomorrow morning," he said. Ava nodded. "I'm coming with you," she said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't a request. It was just a fact stated clearly in the voice of a woman who had just discovered that her father had left her one more thing to do, and she intended to do it. Logan looked at her. "All right," he said. He put the key in his pocket. He walked back to his cart. He picked up his mop. And for the first time in 11 months, the act of picking up that mop felt different. Not smaller, not larger, just different. Like a thing he was choosing rather than a thing he was assigned. He began to mop. Behind him, he heard Ava say something quiet to Garrett. He heard Garrett respond. He heard the ordinary sounds of the garage resuming around him, tools' voices, the distant sound of an engine being tested in a service bay. But underneath all of it, he could hear something else. The echo of a V12, still warm. And somewhere in Brooklyn, a storage unit full of 15 years, he thought he'd lost forever. He didn't sleep that night, not for lack of trying. He lay in the dark listening to the sounds of the apartment, the radiator ticking a car passing on the street below. Maya's small, steady breathing through the wall, and he held the key on his chest like it was something that might disappear if he set it down. Lucas Reinhold. He hadn't said that name out loud in 8 years. He had buried it so thoroughly, so deliberately, that hearing it in Ava's voice in that garage had felt like being pulled out of deep water. The sudden cold shock of air, the disorientation of surfacing somewhere you'd forgotten you'd sunk from. He thought about the day he'd made the decision to change it. A Wednesday in February, 8 years ago, a Social Security office in Newark. Maya, asleep in her stroller beside him, 3 months old, and completely indifferent to the fact that her father was erasing himself. The woman at the counter had been kind. She hadn't asked why. People who work in those offices learn not to ask why. Logan Reed. He had chosen the name carefully common enough to disappear into different enough from Lucas Reinhold that no casual search would connect them. He had kept the same initials for Maya's sake, so the monogram on the old jacket he'd saved still made some kind of sense, though she was too young to notice, and he was probably the only one who cared. He thought about what Ava had said. He spent 3 years trying to locate you. A man he'd never met. A man who drove a 1963 Ferrari every Sunday and was precise about everything, and did not walk past injustice when it was inconvenient. A man who had found the evidence, preserved it, locked it inside a car that could only be started by someone who spoke its language, and then died before he could close the loop. The improbability of it should have felt like a miracle. Instead, it felt like grief for a stranger for a version of his own life that had been waiting in a storage unit in Brooklyn while he mopped floors 40 blocks away. At 2 a.m., he got up, went to the kitchen, made coffee he didn't drink, and sat at the table until the sky outside the window went from black to that particular gray that comes before dawn. Then he got up, checked on Maya, and started the day. He texted Ava at 6:15. She responded in 4 minutes, which told him she hadn't slept much either. Meet at the garage at 8. I have a car. He was there at 7:50. She pulled up at 8:02 in a black sedan. No driver, she was behind the wheel herself, which surprised him. She was in dark jeans and a gray wool coat, no blazer, and she looked like a version of herself that hadn't been assembled yet for public consumption. More tired, more real. She leaned across and pushed the passenger door open. He got in. They didn't say anything for the first several blocks. The city moved around them the way the city always moves in early morning, purposeful and indifferent, and beautiful in that accidental way that cities are beautiful when you're not looking directly at them. Finally, Ava said, "How are you doing?" It was such a simple question. Such an unexpectedly simple question from a woman who communicated almost exclusively in directives and assessments that Logan turned to look at her. "Honestly?" he said. "Please." "I don't know yet," he said. "I've been in the same place for so long that moving feels strange." She nodded like she understood that. He suspected she did in her own way. "My father used to say that the scariest moment is just before you open a door," she said. "Not after, before." He sounds like he was a wise man. "He was a difficult man," she said. "Wise and difficult in about equal measure." A pause. "I was angry at him for a long time, for not telling me he was sick, for leaving without—" She stopped, restarted. "He left a lot of things unsaid. That's what I thought anyway. It turns out he said everything. He just said it to a car." Logan almost smiled. "That's a very specific kind of man." "Yes, it is." She changed lanes smoothly. "Did you have someone like that, a mentor and Mancini?" Logan said. "Carlo Mancini." "Tell me about him." It was the first time anyone had asked him that in years, maybe ever here in this life. He thought about how to begin. "He was 71 when I met him," Logan said. "He had hands like you ever see old wood that's been worked so long it looks like part of the tree. That was his hands. He could look at an engine and tell you what was wrong before he touched it. Just by listening." Logan paused. "He didn't talk much. He was Italian, which people assume means talkative, but he was the quietest person I've ever known. He taught almost entirely by example. You watched him. You asked questions, and sometimes he answered, and sometimes he just handed you something and made you figure it out. Well, he sounds like he was worth paying attention to," Ava said. "He was the best teacher I ever had," Logan said. "I didn't understand that when I was with him. I understood it later, when I had no one left to ask, and I had to use everything he'd given me from memory." Ava was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Was he involved in the fraud, the consortium you exposed?" "No." Logan was certain of that. He had nothing to do with it. He was retired by then, mostly. But some of the cars whose provenance was being falsified, they had been through his shop legitimately years before. His name was being used without his knowledge. That was part of what made it so effective. His reputation was impeccable. Did he know what they were doing? I told him, when I found out. Logan looked at his hands. He was the first person I told. Before the authorities, before anyone. I thought I trusted his judgment more than I trusted my own. What did he say? Logan was quiet for a moment. He said, "Tell the truth and let the cards fall." That's what he said. A pause. I did, and the cards fell on me. Ava said nothing, but her jaw tightened slightly, and Logan filed that away, the way injustice affected her physically involuntarily, the way it wasn't abstract to her. They crossed into Brooklyn at 8:40. The storage facility was a nondescript building on a street full of nondescript buildings, the kind of place designed to be forgotten about, which is the whole point of such places. Ava parked. They walked to the front office together, where a young man with a phone, and no particular interest in them, checked the unit number against the account, verified Ava's ID, and buzzed them through without ceremony. The unit was on the second level. They took stairs that echoed. The key was in Logan's pocket, and his hand found it automatically as they walked down the corridor. Unit 247. He stood in front of it. Ava stood slightly behind him and to the right. He could feel her not rushing him. He put the key in the lock. It turned with the kind of smoothness that only comes from good engineering and regular maintenance. Someone had kept this lock oiled. Someone had cared about this unit even while it waited. He rolled the door up. The unit was small, maybe 8 by 10. Lined along one wall were archive boxes, 8 of them labeled in small, neat handwriting. Along the other wall, a metal filing cabinet standing alone. And on a shelf above the boxes, a single manila envelope, with no label sitting by itself like it had been placed there last. Logan stepped inside. He walked to the boxes first, read the labels, his own name, his real name, Lucas Reinhold, on 3 of them. the name of the consortium on 2 others. Individual names on the remaining 3 names he recognized with a cold, specific recognition, the names of men who had sat in lawyers' offices and said he was lying. "These are the documents," he said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. Ava had come in behind him. She was looking at the boxes, then at the filing cabinet, then at the shelf with the envelope. "Open one," she said quietly. He opened the nearest box with his name on it. Inside, neatly organized, were copies of every document he had originally compiled. The provenance records, the comparative analyses, the financial trails he had spent 8 months building that he had handed to the wrong men who had made them disappear. They were all here, every one, and alongside them were additional documents, follow-up investigations, affidavits from sources. Logan had never reached financial records he hadn't had access to. James Kensington had not just preserved Logan's original work, he had continued it. Logan's hand was shaking slightly. He noticed this from a distance, the way you notice a detail about someone else. "He kept going," Logan said. "After you disappeared," Ava said softly. "He kept going." Logan set the box down carefully. He straightened up. He put both hands flat on the top of the box and pressed down, not hard, just firmly, the way you hold on to something to remind yourself it's real. "Why?" Logan said. It came out raw. He hadn't intended that. "He didn't know me. He had no stake in this. Why would a man spend years?" "Because that's who he was," Ava said. Her voice broke slightly on the last word. She cleared her throat. "That is exactly who he was. He could not leave a wrong thing alone. It was his best quality, and also the most exhausting thing about him." She paused. "He and I used to fight about it. I told him once that he couldn't save everyone. He said he wasn't trying to save everyone. He was just trying to not look away." Logan stood very still. He thought about 11 months of mopping floors, about being invisible, about choosing invisibility because it was safe, because it kept Maya safe, because the last time he'd been visible, it had cost him everything. He thought about a man he'd never met who hadn't looked away. "The envelope," Ava said quietly. "On the shelf." Logan reached up and took it down. His name was on it. Not Logan Reed. Lucas Reinhold, written in the same small, careful handwriting as the box labels. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, dated 14 months ago, which meant James Kensington had written it less than a year before he died. He read it. He read it twice. Then he handed it to Ava without a word. She took it. He watched her face as she read it. Watched her expression move through several things in rapid succession. Recognition, grief, something fierce and protective, and then something that settled into quiet, absolute resolution. The letter was brief. It said, "If you are reading this, then the right person found the car. These documents are the property of Lucas Reinhold and should be returned to him. They contain sufficient evidence to reopen the 2009 investigation into the Meridian Provenance Consortium. If Lucas Reinhold cannot be located, contact the investigative journalist whose card is enclosed. If he can be located, tell him I'm sorry it took this long." Ava lowered the letter. She reached into the envelope, which Logan hadn't checked completely, and found the journalist's card. She turned it over. On the back, in the same handwriting, "Also tell him he was right." The storage unit was very quiet. "He knew," Logan said. "He knew everything, and he just needed to find me." "Yes," Ava said. "And I was 40 blocks away." "Yes," Logan laughed. It surprised him. It surprised both of them. Not a happy laugh and not a bitter laugh. Just the laugh that comes when something is so specifically absurd that the only response is to acknowledge it with your whole body. Ava looked at him when he laughed, and after a moment she laughed too. Just briefly, just enough. Then it passed, and they were standing in the storage unit again with 8 boxes of evidence and a letter from a dead man and the weight of 15 years in the air between them. "What happens now?" Logan said. Ava squared her shoulders. He'd seen her do that before, the small physical act of deciding. "Now I call my attorney," she said. "And then we call the journalist. And then—" She looked at the boxes. "Then we open all of these." "It'll take time," Logan said. "Even with the documentation, a case this old, there are statutes of limitations, jurisdictional." "I have the best legal team in New York," Ava said simply. "And I have resources. And I have—" She gestured at the boxes. "This." She paused. "And I have you. Your testimony. Your original account." She looked at him directly. "If you're willing, if you're—" Logan thought about Maya. He always thought about Maya first. That was the order of things had been for 8 years, and he didn't expect that to change. But he thought about her differently now. He thought about her asking him someday what he did when the truth was available and dangerous and difficult. He thought about what he wanted the answer to be. "I'm willing," he said. Ava nodded once, decisive. "Then we start today." She was already reaching for her phone when it rang. She glanced at the screen, and something shifted in her expression, a flash of something that wasn't professional composure, something sharper and colder. She answered it. "What is it, Marcus?" A pause. Logan watched her face, watched it go through something he couldn't fully read, surprise, then anger controlled so quickly it was almost invisible. "When?" she said. Not a question, a demand. Another pause. "Don't say anything to anyone," she said. "I'll be there in an hour." She hung up. Logan looked at her. "What happened?" She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked at him with an expression that was simultaneously the most controlled and the most alarmed he had ever seen on a human face. "Someone at the garage," she said slowly, "has been asking questions about you. About who you are. About why I've been spending time with the maintenance worker." She paused. "Marcus says a man came in this morning, said he was from an insurance company doing a routine review. He asked very specific questions about a Logan Reed and the Ferrari and the hidden compartment." Her voice dropped. "Marcus says the man knew about the compartment before anyone told him." The storage unit felt smaller suddenly. Logan's mind moved fast, the way it moved when it needed to, cutting through noise, finding the shape of things. "The consortium," he said. "That would be my guess," Ava said. "They're still operating." "Apparently." "They've been watching," Logan said. 15 years later, they're still watching. Or watching me," Ava said. "My father's investigation may have made them nervous. If they suspected he had documentation—" She stopped. "If they knew about the storage unit." "They'd need to know what's in it," Logan said. "They'd need to get to it before anyone else does." They looked at each other. "We need to move these," Logan said. "Yes," Ava said. She was already moving, already thinking 3 steps ahead, and for the first time since he'd known her, Logan saw her not as a woman managing a situation, but as her father's daughter. That particular quality of not looking away, of refusing to let a wrong thing stay wrong, now fully visible in the set of her jaw and the steadiness of her eyes. "Logan," she said. And she used his name the first time she had just his first name, without the formal distance. "How good is your memory of the original evidence? The documentation you compiled 15 years ago?" "Perfect," he said. It wasn't arrogance. It was a simple fact, the way some memories work when they're built from pain. "Good." She took the manila envelope, tucked it inside her coat. "Because they already know something is happening. Which means we have to move faster than they do." She picked up the nearest box. "Help me carry these." Logan picked up 2 boxes. They moved quickly, and they didn't talk, and the corridor echoed, and the morning outside was cold and real and full of implications that neither of them had fully processed yet. But they moved. That was the thing about both of them, Logan thought, as they loaded boxes into the trunk of her car, and the street around them went about its ordinary business. They were people who moved when moving was required regardless of the cost. It was perhaps the most important thing they had in common. He didn't think about that too long. He had boxes to carry. They drove back to Manhattan in silence, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of what had just been found, and what was now in motion, and what it would mean when it finally came to rest. And in Logan's pocket, the small ordinary key to a unit that no longer needed keeping. He turned it between his fingers once. Then he put it away. The boxes went into Ava's private conference room on the 14th floor, stacked along the wall under the window, and by noon there were 3 attorneys in the room, and a forensic accountant Ava had pulled from another case, and a woman named Diane Marsh, who was the journalist whose card had been in the envelope, and who had driven from her office in Midtown in under 20 minutes when Ava called her. Logan sat at the far end of the conference table and watched it happen the way you watch something you set in motion but no longer fully control, with a mixture of relief and vertigo. The specific feeling of a man who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just set it down and doesn't quite know what to do with his empty hands. Diane Marsh was 50-something compact, with the particular alertness of someone who has spent decades listening for the thing behind the thing people say. She sat across from Logan and put a recorder on the table between them and looked at him directly. "Mr. Reinhold," she said. He hadn't been called that by a stranger in 8 years. He didn't flinch. "Read," he said quietly. "For now, still read." She nodded, respecting it. "How much do you remember?" "Everything," he said. She clicked the recorder on. He talked for 2 hours. He started at the beginning, the first irregularity he'd noticed in a provenance document for a 1957 Maserati being sold through a dealer in Geneva. The way it nagged at him. The 8 months of quiet documentation that followed him working in the evenings after the workshop closed, building a picture piece by piece. The names, the amounts, the specific mechanism by which cars with damaged or fraudulent histories were laundered through legitimate restoration records, using real craftsmen's reputations, including Mancini's, as cover. He told her about the morning he'd walked into the authorities' office in Geneva with a folder 3 inches thick and left 3 hours later, feeling for the first time like the truth had weight. He told her how wrong that feeling turned out to be. He told her about the 6 months that followed, the canceled contracts, the phone calls that stopped, the colleagues who didn't return messages, the counter-narrative that spread through the industry with the efficiency of something professionally managed, which it was. The moment he understood that the people he had reported to were connected to the people he had reported on, and that the folder he had handed over had gone directly from the desk of integrity into the hands of the men who needed it to disappear. He told her about his wife. He kept that part brief and factual because some things you can describe, and some things you can only indicate the shape of. And the shape of that was still too specific to hand to a stranger with a recorder. He told her about Maya, 3 months old, absolutely requiring a world, and him deciding to build her one from scratch in a city where no one knew his name. Diane Marsh did not interrupt him once. She asked 3 clarifying questions. Each of them precise. Each of them the question of someone who already understood the architecture and was checking load-bearing points. When he finished, she sat back and looked at the recorder for a moment. Then she looked at him. "The Meridian Consortium," she said. "I've been trying to get traction on a story adjacent to this for 2 years. Different angle, same structure. I kept hitting the same walls you hit." She paused. "With what's in these boxes, and your testimony, and Kensington's documentation, that wall comes down." "How long?" Logan asked. "To publish weeks, not months. This is documented. This isn't allegation." She leaned forward. "But here's what you need to understand. When this publishes, the people named in it will respond. Aggressively. They have resources. They have attorneys." She held his gaze. "They will come at you." "They already know something is happening," Logan said. "Someone came to the garage this morning." Diane's expression sharpened. "What do you mean?" Ava, who had been listening from the end of the table, explained. Diane listened with the recorder still running, and as she listened, her expression moved through several things and settled into something very focused and very alert. "Then we move fast," Diane said. "Not weeks, days." Ava looked at Logan. Logan said, "Do what you need to do." Diane was already on her phone. Bye. The afternoon moved at a pace that felt nothing like the pace of the 11 months that had preceded it. Attorneys reviewed documents. The forensic accountant built a timeline that mapped against the financial records in Kensington's files. Diane coordinated with her editor by phone, her voice low and rapid, and absolutely certain. Ava moved between conversations with the precision of a woman who had built an empire by understanding that the most important thing you can do in a crisis is refuse to be disorganized. Logan sat in the middle of all of it and gave testimony when asked and answered questions when needed, and thought about Maya, who was in school right now, learning something entirely unrelated to all of this, still trusting the world completely. At 2:15, his phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He stepped out of the conference room and answered it. "Mr. Reed." The voice was male pleasant, the kind of pleasant that is a professional choice rather than a natural state. Or should I say, "Mr. Reinhold, I understand you've been a busy man this morning." Logan's blood went cold. He kept his voice level. "Who is this?" "Someone who has an interest in the contents of a storage unit in Brooklyn," the voice said, "and a strong preference that those contents remain private." "They're already in the hands of attorneys," Logan said. A pause. "I know. We've been watching Ms. Kensington's building for the last hour." Another pause shorter. "Mr. Reed, you've been living quietly for 8 years. You have a daughter, a good school, a life that works." The voice was still pleasant. It was the pleasantness that made it frightening. "None of that needs to change. We're not interested in you specifically. We're interested in containing a situation." "You're calling to threaten me," Logan said. "I'm calling to offer perspective," the voice said. "The documentation in those boxes is old. Cases this old rarely survive legal scrutiny. You would be putting yourself and your daughter through years of litigation for a probable dismissal. That is not a comfortable life for a child." Logan was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, "My daughter's name is Maya. She's 8 years old. She already knows that when something is wrong, you say so. She learned that from me." He paused. "Don't call this number again." He hung up. He stood in the hallway outside the conference room. His hand was steady. He noticed that specifically, his hand was steady. He went back inside. He walked directly to Ava. "They called me," he said quietly, "on my cell." Ava went very still. "What?" "They have my number. They know Maya's school, or implied it." He kept his voice low even. "I need to pick her up now. I need her somewhere." "My apartment," Ava said immediately. No hesitation. "It's secured. Full-time security. I'll call ahead." She was already moving, already reaching for her own phone. "Go." "The attorneys." "I'll handle the attorneys. Go get your daughter." He went. "That's he." He was out of the building in 90 seconds, and in a cab in 2 minutes, and at Maya's school in 14 minutes, which was a personal record, and he walked into the front office and told the woman at the desk that he needed his daughter now, early pickup family situation. And the woman looked at his face and picked up the phone without asking questions because his face said everything that needed saying. Maya came out of her classroom with her backpack half-zipped and a look of pure confusion. "Dad? It's not 3:15. "I know, sweetheart. Come on." "Did something happen?" He took her hand. "Something is happening," he said. "It's okay. But we're going to go somewhere different today." She looked up at him as they walked. She was 8, and she was smart, and she had her mother's eyes and her father's capacity for reading a room. "Are you scared?" she asked, and he squeezed her hand. "A little," he said, "but the good kind. The kind that means something important is happening." She thought about this. Like before a volcano erupts. He almost laughed. Exactly like that. She nodded, accepting this, and didn't let go of his hand. Ava's building was on the Upper East Side, The kind of building that had a uniformed doorman and a lobby with real marble, and an elevator that moved silently and opened directly into the apartment. The security team was expecting them. A woman named Claire met them at the elevator and showed Logan where everything was with brisk efficiency, and showed Maya the kitchen, which was the right instinct because Maya was immediately interested in the kitchen. Logan called Ava. "We're in." "Good. Logan, Diane's editor, approved the story. They're publishing in 48 hours. We're going to do a simultaneous filing with federal authorities, the same filing your attorneys will coordinate. They won't be able to suppress it this time." A brief pause. "There are too many people involved now, too many institutions. The window they had is closed." Logan sat down on a chair in Ava's kitchen, while Maya investigated the contents of the refrigerator with the focused attention of a scientist. 48 hours, he said. 48 hours, she confirmed. "Can you hold?" He looked at Maya, who had found a container of leftover pasta and was looking at it with profound approval. "Yes," he said. "We can hold." The next 48 hours were the strangest of Logan's life, which was saying something given that his life had contained some genuinely strange stretches. They stayed at Ava's apartment. She came home late that first night, jacket off, before she was through the door, and found Logan at the kitchen table with his laptop and Maya asleep on the couch under a blanket Ava's housekeeper had found. She stopped in the doorway and looked at the scene for a moment without saying anything. Then she quietly went to the kitchen and made tea for both of them, and they sat at the table and talked until midnight. Not about the case, not about strategy, just talked. About Mancini. About her father. About what it means to build a life from the pieces of a previous one. About Maya and the volcano theory and the book report about the girl who builds a rocket ship. "She's remarkable," Ava said. She was looking at Maya from across the room. "She has your stillness. That quality of paying attention without making noise about it." "She got that honestly," Logan said. Ava wrapped both hands around her mug. "I owe you an apology," she said. Logan looked up. "When you first looked at the car," she said, "I brought you over the way you bring someone over to humor yourself. I didn't see you. I saw a uniform and a mop and I made a judgment." She kept her eyes on the table. "I was wrong." "You also gave me a chance," Logan said, "even if you didn't fully mean to." "That's a generous interpretation." "Maybe, but it's the one I choose." He paused. "We make the meanings we can live with, Ms. Kensington." She looked up at him then. "Ava," she said. "At this point, I think you can call me Ava." He nodded. "Ava." The story published on a Thursday morning. Logan found out because his phone started ringing at 6 a.m. and didn't stop. Diane Marsh had been thorough and precise, and the piece was the kind of journalism that doesn't ask for your attention, it demands it. Names, figures, transactions, the specific chain of corruption, moving from Geneva to London to New York over 22 years, documented in a way that left no credible alternative interpretation. His name was in it. His real name, his story, his testimony described with care and accuracy. The phrase used was a specialist whose warnings were deliberately suppressed by the authorities he trusted to act on them. He sat with that sentence for a long time. By 8 a.m., the federal filing was confirmed. By 9, 2 of the named individuals had retained counsel. By 10, a former authority in Geneva, who had received Logan's original documentation 15 years ago, had issued a statement through his lawyer saying he looked forward to cooperating with any investigation, which was the statement of a man who had already decided to negotiate. Ava called him at 10:30. "It's moving," she said. "Fast." "I can see that." "How are you?" He thought about it honestly. "Like a man who's been holding his breath for 15 years and just exhaled," he said. A brief silence. "That's what my father would have said," she said quietly. "Almost exactly." Logan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, and she seemed to understand that nothing was the right answer. At noon, he got a call from a number he didn't recognize with an international area code. He answered it carefully. "Is this Lucas Reinhold?" The voice was old and Italian and familiar in a way that went straight to something in his chest. "This is Lucas," he said. He used the name without thinking. It came back naturally like a language he'd thought he'd forgotten. "This is Giorgio Ferrante. I was Carlo's assistant. For 11 years. A pause. "I saw the story, this morning. I have been waiting a long time to make this call." Logan closed his eyes. Giorgio Ferrante. He remembered a quiet young man in the corner of the workshop, always watching, always careful. "Giorgio," he said. "How are you?" "Better now," Giorgio said. "Carlo told me, before he died. He told me that what happened to you was wrong, and that someday someone would correct it." His voice caught slightly. "He said you were the best student he ever had. He wanted you to know that. I should have found a way to tell you earlier. I'm sorry." Logan stood very still in the middle of Ava's kitchen. "Thank you," he said. It came out barely above a whisper. He cleared his throat. "Thank you, Giorgio." They talked for 20 minutes. About Mancini, about the workshop, about the particular quality of light in Florence in autumn, and the way Mancini used to hum to himself when he was working on something difficult, just barely audible, as if the humming helped him think. When they hung up, Logan stood at the kitchen counter for a moment and didn't do anything at all. Then Maya came in from the living room and said, "Dad, can we go to the garage today? I want to see the Ferrari you've been talking about." He looked at her. "Who said I've been talking about it?" "You talk about it in your sleep," she said matter-of-factly. "Also when you think I'm not listening." He looked at his daughter, her complete certainty, her total comfort in the world, the way she stood there with one sock half off, as if this were a reasonable thing to just say to a person. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go see the Ferrari."
남편고.
They went that afternoon, Logan and Maya and Ava, who had cleared 2 hours from a schedule that did not typically accommodate 2 hours of clearing. Maya walked into the garage and looked around with the focused expression she brought to anything she considered worth her full attention, and the technicians who saw her smiled the way people smile when a child arrives in a serious place and makes it briefly exactly right. She stopped in front of the Ferrari. She stood there for a long moment just looking at it, and Logan stood beside her and didn't say anything because she was doing the thing she did, paying attention, without making noise about it. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "Yes, it is," Logan said. "Can I sit in it?" Logan looked at Ava. Ava looked at Maya. Then she unhooked the velvet rope herself, opened the driver's door and said, "Be my guest." Maya climbed in with the solemnity of someone accepting a responsibility. She put her hands on the steering wheel. She looked through the windshield at nothing in particular. She sat there for a full minute in total silence. Then she said, "Dad, I think I understand what you meant." "What did I mean?" he asked. "About it looking like it's running even when it's standing still." She ran her hands along the wheel. "It's like it's just waiting, like it knows it's going somewhere, it's just being patient about it." Logan's throat tightened. Garrett, who was standing nearby pretending to look at something on his tablet, made a sound that was not quite clearing his throat and walked away briskly. Ava was looking at Maya with an expression that Logan recognized because he'd seen it on her face in the storage unit in Brooklyn, and once in the elevator going down, and briefly last night at the kitchen table, that specific look of someone seeing their father in an unexpected place. "She's right, you know," Ava said quietly to no one in particular. "That's exactly what it's doing." Then 3 weeks later, the federal investigation was formally opened. 2 weeks after that, the first arrest was made, a man in London, whose name had appeared in Logan's original documentation, whose name had appeared in Kensington's follow-up documentation, whose name had appeared on the call log of the number that had called Logan's cell phone while he stood in the hallway outside the conference room. The pleasant voice? The professional pleasantness. Not so pleasant now, reportedly. Logan was not at the arrest. He was at Maya's school, watching her present. A new book report, this one about a real person, a woman named Bessie Coleman, who had taught herself to fly at a time when no one would teach her. Maya stood at the front of the classroom and talked about her with the intensity she brought to everything she loved. And Logan sat in a small plastic chair in the back row and watched his daughter and felt for the first time in 8 years that the chair he was sitting in was in the right room. He had a meeting the following Monday with a consulting firm, one of 3 that had contacted him in the 2 weeks since the story published, people who had read his work under his real name and understood now that the counter-narrative had been dismantled, what that work had actually represented. The meeting was professional and respectful, and the man across the table treated him with the specific regard reserved for someone whose expertise has been verified by something harder than credentials. He drove back from that meeting in a car he had rented, not the black sedan, not Ava's car, his own rented car, and he stopped at the garage on the way, because he wanted to, simply because he wanted to, and he walked through the front door and past Danny at the desk and through the garage floor to where the Ferrari sat. He stood in front of it. He didn't touch it. He just stood there the way you stand in front of something that changed your life, acknowledging that it did. And Garrett came up beside him. They stood together for a moment in silence, the comfortable silence of 2 men who have figured each other out and no longer need to pretend they haven't. "You're not coming back, are you?" Garrett said. Not a question. "I don't think so," Logan said. Garrett nodded. A long pause. "For what it's worth," he said. "I should have asked your name sooner. Asked it like it mattered." Logan looked at him. "You're asking now," he said. "That counts." Garrett extended his hand. Logan shook it. That evening, Maya asked him at dinner pasta, the good kind made from scratch, because they were celebrating something, even if she wasn't entirely sure what she asked him. "Dad, does this mean people know how amazing you are now?" He looked at her across the table, at her complete certainty, at the total confidence with which she said the word amazing, as if the amazing part had never been in question, as if the only question was whether the world had caught up yet. Yes, he thought about 11 months of gray uniforms and invisible mornings. He thought about a key in a compartment under a seat and a letter from a dead man and a journalist with a recorder and an editor who understood what they had. He thought about Giorgio Ferrante calling from Italy and Mancini humming in a workshop in Florence and a young man 30 years old standing next to a Ferrari and laughing at something off camera, one hand on the hood, completely at ease. He thought about Ava, who had grabbed the mop from his hands and seen a uniform, and then slowly, at significant personal cost to everything she thought she'd understood, seen the man. He smiled at his daughter. "Maybe," he said, "but you knew first." Maya considered this, decided it was accurate, and went back to her pasta. Outside, the city moved the way cities move, indifferent and purposeful, and full of people carrying things no one could see. Somewhere across town, a 1963 Ferrari 250 GTE sat in a garage with its engine quiet and its secrets given back, its work finally done. Not as a symbol of wealth, not as a relic of grief, but as proof of something stubbornly, inconveniently true, that the right person for any problem is not always the loudest person in the room, and that the truth, however long you bury it, does not become less true for being buried. Logan Reed. Lucas Reinhold had known this for 15 years. He had lived it in gray uniforms and early mornings, and a yellow room painted like sunflowers, and a daughter who believed without evidence and without doubt that her father was amazing. It turned out she had been right all along. She always had been.